Hi, so this is our video for hybrid class, Cow of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and the Ortex of Jewish Responsibility. So if you remember, we spent some time in class talking about the appointment of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and specifically how he became like a person of 70. And when we see that word, those words, like a person of 70, we realize that actually he wasn't 70 because he went to be appointed as the as Rabban Gamliel's replacement, and all of a sudden he goes home, and his wife says, "You're not old enough," and all of a sudden a miracle occurs, and his hair turns gray. By the way, let me tell you also what an interesting metaphor that is, because if you look at pictures of presidents, often before and after they serve as president, their hair quickly, if it hasn't been gray, totally becomes gray. And so maybe it's a metaphor that actually the grayness comes from the kind of the onus of responsibility and stuff like that. But what I want to keep in mind as we move forward, since we're learning about the cow of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, is this phrase down here where the sages decide, kind of, they ask themselves, who are we going to pick as Rabban Gamliel's placement? And they say, let's establish Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Specifically, why? Because he is wise, rich, and a 10th generation descendant of Ezra. So they think these three characteristics, wise, rich, and good genealogy, kind of allow him to be. And we're going to need those characteristics as we move forward in our piece of Gemara. But first, we start with a piece when we're looking at the idea of responsibility. We begin with a specific a Mishnah in Masechet Shabbat, Seder Moed, Masechet Shabbat, chapter 5, Mishnah number 4. So a little bit of background. There it is right there, but a little bit of background before we get started. So here we go. My name is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. I lived in the same time as the famous Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Joshua and Rabbi Meir and Rabban Gamliel. For a brief amount of time, I was even the head of the Jewish people. You may remember me from your Passover Seder. When the bigwig rabbis are mentioned, I am always among them. The story of Jewish responsibility begins in kind of a hidden way, and it all starts with a law about how animals, like humans, are not allowed to do work on Shabbat. Just look below. It says it right in the Torah, in the Ten Commandments, and there it is right there. But on V'yom HaShvi'i, Shabbat l'Adonai Elohecha, on the seventh day is Shabbat for Hashem. You shall not do any work. Ata, you, uvincha, your sons, uvitecha, your daughters, avdecha, your servants, amatcha, your female servants, uvehemtecha, and your animals, ifigercha, shebersherecha, and any kind of foreigners that are in your midst. No one is allowed to do work on Shabbat. So all of the things that we're not allowed to do on Shabbat, and there are 39 major principles, major no-nos on Shabbat, and it doesn't just apply to us, but actually applies to our animals as well. And this is what we're going to be talking about as well. That shouldn't be there. So some background information. So a main no-no of Shabbat is actually carrying something in a public area or transferring something from a private area to a public area. Just a little aside, that there's something called an eruv, or kind of an enclosure that some strings that you can put up that make a public area a private area, and it allows for carrying to happen. Just so you know, that there's one place in Irvine that has an eruv, and that's actually in University Park. So if you actually go down there, you can see some strings all around, and that's an eruv, making a public area into a private area, so people are allowed to carry. And often people who take that law really seriously live in that area, so live in an eruv. And often, if you want to know kind of where the Jewish people who take Jewish law really seriously, you might, when you go to a community, you might ask yourself, oh, does that community have an eruv, or where is that eruv? And so that's kind of often a telltale sign of the people living in there. Are they really serious about Jewish law? Okay, so a main no-no on Shabbat is carrying something in a public area, or transferring from a private area to public. Since Torah says that your animals also need a Shabbat, there are Jewish laws that tell us when an animal is wearing something and when an animal is actually carrying something. So animals are kind of weird. Like, when are they carrying something, which actually would be, or when are they wearing something, and when are they carrying something. If you're wearing something, that feels like that's okay, right? But what if you're carrying something? Then that's kind of, so there's this weird line in between, right? There's also a fear that when an animal drops an article of clothing, the owner will actually pick that thing up and in a way violate also a law of Shabbat. So the question is, even if that animal is actually wearing something, if that's an easy thing to fall off, then you run into this fear like maybe the owner's going to pick it up, and that's not good, right? So the Mishnah that we'll now read says that wearing items, even when they're only decorative items, are not allowed. And so that's what kind of our Mishnah is going to talk about. Sorry for the noise in the background. And then, okay, so even when they're not allowed, and they're only decorative items, they're not allowed. So here we go with the Mishnah itself. So the Mishnah asks, with what may an animal go out on Shabbat, and with what may an animal not go out? And the Mishnah answers, a donkey may not go out with a saddlecloth or with bells around its neck, because it would appear, this is the commentary, because it would appear as if the donkey was heading to a market, and it might fall off, and an owner would be tempted to pick it up. And if she did, then the owner would have violated Shabbat Nono of carrying. Okay. Chickens may also not go out with ribbons because it might fall off, and then an owner would be tempted to pick it up. And if she did, then the owner would have violated the same law, the Shabbat law of carrying. Or a cow with a strap between its horns for the same reason. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, oh, we know that name. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's cow used to go out with a strap between its horns. The rabbis did not approve of this. So after the Mishnah was written, this is a little bit of a review here, but after the Mishnah was written, about 200 years passed. Most of the Jewish people moved away from Israel and were now living in Babylonia, Iraq, and they studied the Mishnah 24/7 and often asked questions about what it meant. Here comes one of those questions now. I'm a Jewish scholar living in Babylonia. I studied the Mishnah with a group of other scholars. Eventually, my discussions with them will be written down in a book called the Talmud. So the other day, I found a big question that I brought to the other scholars. My question has to do with the Mishnah you all just read, and my question has to do with the line about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, right? So here it is right here. Paratosha Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Haita Yotzei, Birtsua sheben karneha shelo birtson chachamim. That the cow of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, he would go out, yotzah, birtsua sheben karneha, with some kind of leather strip that was between its horns, which was not was not with the approval of the sages. So it's strange, very strange phrase. Now, Elias, okay, so we have it right here. So the Talmud's going to ask a question about this phrase, and anything you've learned about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah that would actually help you kind of ask the same question the Talmud's going to class. So just think about that for a moment before we get to the real answer, because that's always a fun part. Okay. And here we go right here. So then I recalled something else I once read about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Now, you should also be recalling something you heard about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah right here, something that makes you very suspect about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah having one cow. What might that be? All right, let's go check it out. Well, so he learned something else. And what was that something else? So he learned that there was a Braita that said the following. So first of all, here's what I once remember reading. It has to do with the rule that Jews need to give 10% of the money that they make to charity. Now, check this out. Okay, and this comes from Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. And it says the following. Trei Sar 12 Tresar Alfe 1,000 Igle cows Hava Maaser Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Would Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah tithe for charity Me Edre Kol Shata V'Shata from his flock each and every year? Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah would give 12,000 cows from his flock to charity each and every year. Which means, by the way, how many cows does Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah have? Now, our Mishnah said Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah had one cow, but how many does this Braita seem to tell us, right? So, oh, and here's Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah saying, "Yep, that's true. Here I am once again, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. I know that you thought that I was just a famous rabbi, but it also just so happens that I'm a very successful cattle farmer. Each year, I give 12,000 cows away as tzedakah." And this rabbi says, "Now, if Elazar ben Azariah gave 12,000 cows away of tzedakah, and if that's only 10%, if that's 10% of what he had, right? Because he's giving 10%, then Elazar ben Azariah had how many cows?" All right, that's a lot of cows. Now, if that's true, then how could the Mishnah talk about his one cow when he had so many? Now, I'm sure you could come up, if you're the Talmud talking, you could come up with a bunch of different answers to that question. But it's a little strange that, right, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah has so many cows, and yet they're only talking about one cow. So here's what the Talmud does. Right, so I brought this question to other rabbis, and one of them recalled the following teachings. Here's the answer. The Mishnah isn't talking about, the Mishnah is not talking about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who had many, many cows. Actually, but Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's neighbor has only one cow. And that's the cow that the Mishnah is talking about. What? What does it have to do with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? And here's the great thing. Here's the answer. Elazar ben Azariah saw his neighbor bringing out his cow with the strap on Shabbat. He knew that this was wrong, but he did nothing to stop his neighbor. For this reason, the rabbi said the cow was his. Because he said nothing, he got the credit for the misdeed. So interesting. And now we have Rav Chanina, Rav Yochanan, and Rav Chaviva saying the following. We were just listening to you two talking, and we've learned a very important lesson from what you have said. And here it is. I'm sorry I have to interrupt for a second because I'm making bread right now, and I need to take it out of the oven. So I'll be right back. But read the Hebrew, please. It's amazing. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So here's what it says. Call me she'efshar lemachot la'anshe beito v'lo micha. Lemachot is a word actually that you will see in a song that we're going to be singing in preparation for Yom HaZikaron when we get back for Passover. But macha means to push away or wipe away. So actually, the song we're going to sing is Umacha Hashem Dima Dima Mea Kopanim Umacha Hashem Dima Mea Hapanim. Right, take away, God, the tears from my eyes. So Kol mi she'afsher lemachot la'anshe beito v'lo micha. Anyone who it's possible for them to wipe away the kind of the misdeeds of people of his house, and he doesn't wipe it away, nit pas al anshe beito. He is seized or he is apprehended because of the deeds of his family, meaning he is responsible in some way and could be punished because of the deeds of his family. But anshe iro, meaning anyone who is possible to push away the bad deeds of his city and doesn't do so, nitpas al anshe iro. He is in some way held liable for the deeds of the people of the city. Bechol ha'olam kulo, anyone who is possible for them to kind of push away the bad deeds of the entire world and doesn't do so, nitpas al kol ha'olam kulo. He is actually judged or given credit for or punished for all of the misdeeds of the world. What an amazing, powerful, powerful idea that comes from this Mishnah about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's cow. Meaning it wasn't his cow, but because he noticed and had the power to tell his neighbor, you can't do that on Shabbat. You shouldn't be doing that. Don't do that. And he remains silent. He is judged as if he gave allowance, gave encouragement, and for doing that, he's actually judged as not his neighbor's problem, and his neighbor's misdeed, but actually his own. What a very powerful, probably one of the most beautiful statements of the Talmud. Now, we've got a lot to talk about here, right? What does it mean to have the power to push aside someone else's or push aside someone, make them be able to stop? Like, do we all have that power? Is that power something that we should all do? Like, is our job to protest even when we don't have that power, even when we feel like we will be ineffective and no consequence will come of that? Is this only talking about people who are in power, who have that kind of power? That's something that we'll kind of maybe talk about a little bit in class. But and so just let me read it out. Anyone who had the ability to effectively protest the bad conduct of the neighbors of his household and does not protest, he himself is guilty for the bad conduct of the member of his household and should be punished. If anyone is in a position to protest the bad conduct of the people of his town, and she fails to do so, she is guilty for the bad conduct of the people of his town. If she is in a position to protest the bad conduct of the whole world, and she fails to do so, then she's guilty for the bad conduct of the whole world. So that's kind of what the Talmud is saying. Now, I want to just talk about, before I end today, I want to talk about something else, because we are coming upon the holiday of Passover, and in the Passover Seder, we actually have one person sitting around our table who is actually labeled as as a bad dude, right? Labeled as a wicked person, right? So just as a little bit of a background of this, right? The Mishnah, what talks about what a Passover Seder should look like, it says, Arba banim dibra Torah. 4 children the Torah speaks about. One of them is wise, one of them is a rasha, or a wicked person, one of them is simple, and one of them does not know how to ask. Okay? And so basically, what the Mishnah is saying here is that the Torah has 4 conversations between a parent and a child about Passover, right? Throughout different parts of the Torah, it has it. And the Mishnah learns that that these 4 conversations aren't just one child asking 4 different questions, but are actually 4 separate conversations from 4 separate children to 4 separate parents. Each of these children are different children, and in a way, these children have different characteristics from one another. And from the question they ask, the Torah the Mishnah kind of understands that there are these actually 4 types of questions that are being asked, and actually that there's really 4 types of people around your Seder table. One of them we're going to label as a rasha. One of them is a kind of a wicked person. All right. So here's the conversation between the wicked child and his parents. So I just want to show you this, the question that they figure out, what's the rasha's question. The rasha says, what do you mean by this act or ritual or service? They're looking out at the service and saying, what is this all about? Like, this is crazy what you're doing, this whole Passover thing, that you're eating this matzah, that you're singing all these songs, that you're dipping your finger in wine and recounting all the plagues. What is this ritual to you? And the answer the Haggadah gives is, when this child was asking the question about Passover, this child chose to use the word to you and not to me. And since he removes himself from a larger group, he denies his essence of what it means to be Jewish, right? So you, the parent, this is what the Haggadah says. You, the parent, will blunt his teeth and say to him, because of the foodstuff on the Seder plate, God did great things for me when I was going out of Egypt. For me and not for him. If he had been there, he would not have been saved. And so what I really want to ask you kind of for your final question of the day is, we just learned this idea about responsibility. We learned that from the cow of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, if you see someone who is doing wrong, your job is in some way to get them on the right path. And if you don't, your ability to if you have the ability to affect change and you do not, then you are in some way held accountable. So I want to get your opinion about how the Passover Seder is playing this out. We've got kind of a person who would kind of be that person who was in some way doing wrong. We have a parent who knows that this is a bad kid, because they're labeling them as such at the Seder. But I want you to look at the response. I want to ask you: are they, in a sense, doing their job? Would our Tom would say, you know what, this person is off the hook. They have done their job. They have actually tried their best to get this kid on the right path, or have they not? And that's really what I want to discuss, because we're going to discuss further kind of laws or responsibilities during class time. I'm going to give you one more kind of source to look at, and we're going to look at how some of these things play out in Jewish law, which I think is pretty fascinating. So that's it for today. And that final question, you're sure to get asked it on your quiz, but we'll also discuss it afterwards in class. That's it. Thank you.